Hey, Lead Up listeners, Mike Harbour, host and publisher of the Lead Up podcast, back with you today for another guest interview. I'm excited to welcome Greta Rosler to the podcast today. I'm going to let Greta tell you all about her, but she's the founder of a company called Radius Leadership. And I want to talk about, we're going to talk today about the biggest things facing healthcare leaders today in the healthcare space, and some other things that are going to be important that leaders need to know to plan for the future of leadership and what's around the corner. Greta, welcome to the Lead Up podcast. Excited to have you with us today.
Thanks, Mike. I'm really excited to be here. These topics are near and dear to my heart, so I'm excited to share some insights with your listeners.
Yeah, well, you and I have been chasing each other down for a little while. I've kind of stalked you a little bit on LinkedIn for a couple of years, just watching what you do, which is always fun. And I love your message, love your voice. Why don't you just tell the audience a little bit about you, your background, and your company real quick before we dive into conversation?
Sure. So, my background is in my heart, I'm a nurse and I'm always a nurse. That's where I began my career. And I got into nursing leadership and then I got into patient experience leadership for a large healthcare system in central Pennsylvania. And from there, I went to work for a national nonprofit company, international nonprofit company, providing and supporting training all across the nation for all sorts of clinicians and healthcare leaders. And what I realized was that the problems were the same everywhere, and that nursing leadership was often the missing piece that needed support. So, in 2017, I founded this company, Radius Leaders, just because I had been involved in some local organizations and seeing these different things across the nation. And people started saying, "Hey, Greta, can you come help our team do this or that?" And I realized there was an opportunity to help leaders with evidence-based skills that help them change outcomes, particularly in the space of nursing.
Yeah, love it. It's often the middle leaders, those mid-range leaders that are the most neglected in an organization, right? Senior leaders, they go to conferences, they get coaching, they get training, and then they come back and say, "Hey, why don't you guys do this? We heard this new thing." But there's really no training and support behind that. I think one of the biggest, I love what healthcare does, right? We do a great job of promoting internally, but then we fail at supporting and developing those nurses today, leaders tomorrow. Hey, Greta, you're going to go lead your friends tomorrow, and then we really don't develop them and teach them how to do that, or even just do the difficult conversations, or coaching, those types of things. So I'm excited to dive into some of your experience with that and how you help leaders do that. But let me ask you this: let's just talk about, what do you feel are the top three challenges healthcare leaders are facing today? Maybe kind of share those with me, and then we'll dive into each one of those a little bit as the conversation progresses.
Mhm. Okay, well, that is such a big question. As my 12-year-old would say when he comes home from school and I say, "What'd you learn?" And he says, "All of it." That's what I'm inclined to say here, all of it. However, there are a couple of things that stand out and are increasingly becoming prominent in the space of healthcare leadership. First one I would say is the notion that wellness and self-care of the leader has to come first. And that is something we kind of always talked about and knew, oh, take care of yourself. But now more than ever, we recognize the detriment to leaders when we're not promoting that actively, and that they can't be at their best when we're not doing that. So that's one of the biggest challenges, is figuring out how to help leaders be self-sustaining and have self-efficacy while still being present and effective in a 24/7 space. That's
Mm.
thing one. The other challenge we face is this idea that in nursing leadership and in many other disciplines in healthcare, we have sought advanced degrees and certificates and all sorts of higher level credentials, which are really valuable to help elevate our professions, particularly in nursing. And those extra credentials, degrees, et cetera, often do not provide the skills that are actually needed to change outcomes. So that's a huge challenge that healthcare is facing. How do we continue to raise the bar for true academic progress while also building truly tangible, effective skills for leaders? And then the third piece is the constant change, right? But even before COVID, it was constant change. Now, after COVID, it's constant change. And the change now is more dynamic and more challenging. And leaders having to do less with more to respond to that is an unending battle. So I really think those are the top three things.
Yeah, all deep subjects we could go into, and I'm sure you could add another 10 more to that, right? Um, let's kind of work backwards a minute because I like this whole idea of change. In my experience in working with healthcare, I've done thousands of assessments on leaders in the healthcare space, and most healthcare providers are, I typically use a DISC assessment. So most healthcare providers, especially in the nursing ranks, are S or C wired or C or S wired, right? Meaning they're the less averse to change. Yet we're in a field that is constantly changing, right? I mean, they like stability, they like structure, but we're constantly asking them to change. And of course, with COVID, it was every 5 minutes, right? A new idea, a new rule came down, but we really hadn't slowed that pace down. Even before COVID, it was constant, but after COVID, we really haven't slowed the pace down. So let's step into that conversation a minute. What are you advising one top leaders, executives, as far as the need for them to recognize that, and how do they pace the change so that we're not overwhelming and burning out those leaders and that staff on the front line?
Well, Mike, there's lots of great and well tested change management models out there and all sorts of things. And they're really useful at a system level. And in the day to day thick of it, sometimes that may not be practical for a leader to think about it that way when they're just getting hit with one thing after another that needs to be changed, that needs attention, that needs leadership. So, what I like to think about with the nurse leaders or healthcare leaders with whom we work is I like to think about, okay, what is the highest priority that you have to accomplish today? And what are one or two steps you can take to accomplish that change today? Because so many times the change is this big, broad thing, and it can be really overwhelming. Oftentimes it's changes in the moment, especially in nursing leadership, that nurse leaders are having to adjust to. They get 10 emails overnight about something that's going to be different tomorrow.
Mm.
And so they come into work and they're flooded with change. And I say to them, what is one action you can take to get your arms around that change right now? And oftentimes it is my favorite thing is leader rounding. That's usually one of the things they can do is they can go out and round on their people, on their patients in a strategic focus way to understand what the impact of the forthcoming change will be or is, or what is needed to make the change happen. So I really recommend they think about what is my highest priority and my highest contribution today, and what is one thing I can do to accomplish that amidst this feverish change that's coming.
Yeah, I love that idea. I often teach a couple of things. One, I teach all the leaders I work with the most important meeting you have every day is the meeting with self. Starting your day out with a meeting with self, right? And doing what you just suggested. And I call it creating your daily GPS. What are your top three? Yeah, you got those 10 emails overnight, or your to-do list is 100 things long. But what are the top three things that you need to put attention into today? You may not get to all three of them, but what are the top three, right? So that when a code happens or, another email comes down, maybe you have to deal with that emergency, but you have a plan to come back. That's why I call it the GPS, right? You have a plan to come back to, okay, where was I? What did I say was most important? Oh, I hadn't even got to number one yet. Let me at least get to number one before the end of the day. It's just a great practice. In my experience, most people are not great time managers or prioritizers, right? And so just pulling those tasks off of their task list and listing the top one, two, or three. It could only be one, Greta, but if you pick three, you're likely to at least get some attention into those. What do you see as the block from, okay, I've got my boss, my senior leaders telling me to do something, but I need to do this. And what is the block between kind of pushback upstream, in your opinion? How do you coach nurses or, mid-level managers to really push back against the constant demands from above?
Well, so I think what you're asking is like, what stops nurse leaders from being a little more advocacy oriented for themselves and to help themselves be even more focused, if I understand your question.
Yeah,
And
better
so
way to
what
put
I
it.
think, okay, all right. So what I think it is, Mike, is or think it's a couple of things. First of all, I think it's conditioning. I think what I've experienced and observed is that healthcare leaders are repeatedly they may try to advocate for themselves or their time needs or a priority, but I'll talk to a nurse leader who will say, I blocked this time on my calendar to do this, and three other people scheduled meetings there, regardless of the block I had.
Mm,
And I was told that I had to be at those meetings. So it's this chronic conflict. And so I think over time, what I observe happen is that becomes defeating.
yeah.
And then they're sort of like, well, okay, I'll just, I'm kind of giving in to this idea that my control of my calendar, control of my time and priorities is not mine. One of the things I think is the missing link and the block to the block is, and this is something I've really been diving into in my doctoral work, is a lack of self efficacy. And self efficacy is the idea that we can accomplish something because we believe we can, and we're more likely to get it done. And in all different fields, in education, in health and wellness, and in leadership, you see self efficacy as a missing link, where students who believe they can do something because of certain conditions are more likely to get it done. Leaders who believe they can do it are more likely to get it done. But that takes a few important precursors. And I think those are missing
Mm.
in a lot of organizations.
So let's talk to two audiences now. What advice would you give to that nurse leader, that nurse manager to create more control for themselves? And then the second question is what advice would you give or are you giving to the C-suite, the chief nurse, the chief executive, the COOs to make sure they're allowing space for those nurse managers to have more control?
So, for the nurse leaders themselves, or any healthcare leader that might be listening, the advice I would give you is there's a few things that are scientifically connected to your ability to perform when it comes to your self efficacy. One is your physiological homeostasis or wellness. And so that sounds very trite and we talk about it all the time, but if you have not slept a decent amount, if you've not eaten nutritiously, if you're way overstressed personally or professionally, you can't have that sense of homeostasis. So that's the first thing you have to fix. Regardless of what is going on or burning down around you, you have to make sure you're getting movement, you're getting appropriate nourishment, and you're getting sleep because you can't thrive without those things. That's thing one. The second thing is finding a role model and mastery experiences. So, who is it that you know in your sphere, in your network, that is able to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish, that you can look up to and you can talk to?
Mm.
And how can you begin to have and embed mastery experiences for those things in your day little by little? So maybe you do want to you want to go out and round more, but you can't because your calendar gets overtaken. So who do you know that's able to do that? And how can you put even small windows of time where you can start to get some success and build on that? That's for the frontline or closest to care leader, as I would
Good.
call them.
Good.
For the senior leaders, I would say pay attention to those things. How can you make sure that your closest to care leaders are, in fact, having true physiological wellness? And that doesn't just mean that there's a Zen den and a painting club once a month and, that you have a team lunch. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, are they getting 10 to 12,000 steps a day? Are they able to do other things that bring them true joy? Are they able to have adequate sleep time off, et cetera? And then the other things with the role models and the mastery experiences. And this is all a sort of a parallel strategy of senior leaders working on it and closest to care leaders working on it themselves. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah, that's good. With healthcare begins with self-care, right? I mean, being able to do some things that give us energy. I wrote a book called Quit Losing Talent. I've got a tactic in there like, titled Building Functional Endurance. I love your advice to senior leaders paying attention to those things. In that in that tactic, what I'm teaching is for us as senior leaders, we need to know what brings energy to our people, right? Our individual people. Where do they function best?
Mhm.
And hopefully 50% of their day they're functioning in their strength areas of strength, right? That really brings them energy. Um, because if they're able to do that, they go home less frustrated, less fatigued, less tired. They're more excited to come back the next day as well. So I think that's great advice. We've been giving lip service for years in healthcare about less meetings, yet we haven't solved that problem, right? Every organization I go into has the exact same issue you just brought up. 3 meetings at the same block that 3 people put on my schedule with no thought to whether does Greta even need to be in this meeting, or why does Greta need to be in this meeting, or can
Mhm.
we can we allow Greta to really go do something in her strength zone versus being in this meeting? I think with the advent or the access to AI tools today, I use AI every single day to record my conversations. I think we should, healthcare organizations need to look at using AI to record sessions or video sessions where it allows leaders maybe on a different time schedule to listen to that recording or watch that video versus just because some of these leaders have 5, 6 hours of meetings a day, and now we're asking them to do their job, with 2 hours left in the day, which is, it's not fair to them. It's not healthy, right? It's certainly not healthy. It overwhelms them. So let's jump to one of those other topics, the self-care. Which we just talked about. You mentioned the notion that wellness and self-care has to come first. Totally agree with you because I don't believe we can pour from an empty cup, right? As a leader, we can't pour from an empty cup, and if we're just burning everybody out, how can we expect them to be effective as leaders? So I'll just let you speak into that.
Yeah. Well, and my one of the things I want to also acknowledge is that none of this is meant to say that healthcare infrastructure isn't broken, right? There's tons of infrastructure problems. I'm not suggesting that nurse leaders or other healthcare leaders need to build up resilience against a utterly broken system
Right.
because the systems are very broken. And what we can look back historically and see today over the sort of trajectory of leadership in healthcare is that while the problems are different and exceedingly difficult today, um, the ability for leaders to adapt and the need for that has always been there.
Mhm.
And one thing that really stands out to me is that I tell this whenever I'm teaching a class or speaking, I talk about this idea that when I worked in a hospital, when I was a nurse leader for a almost 30 bed med surg, well, I had a couple different units, but I would say, oh my gosh, I'll have so much more time when I don't have as many direct reports. And then I went to a role where I didn't have as many direct reports. And I was like, man, you know what? I would have so much more time if I worked from home. And then I started working from home and I thought, I would have so much more time if I worked for myself. And I now work for myself. And guess what? Many days I question, do I actually have more time? And so the only common denominator there is me. And I have to look at myself and hold the mirror up and say, okay, what do I need to do to take care of myself? Because none of these other external factors, changing them has never changed my own habit, my own drive, motivation, et cetera. So
Right.
I think what leaders need to do is hold that mirror up and say, what am I actually doing or what am I avoiding? And what do I need to do to get there? And when it comes to that self-care piece of movement, nourishment, sleep, all the things, listen, I watch a lot of my friends who are actively in nurse leader roles, and I just my mind is blown at how challenging it is. Even though I was there one time, watching it on the periphery blows my mind at how much of a load they carry with their family, their work, there's 24/7 demand.
Mhm.
So I think it comes to starting to set some boundaries for yourself, and saying, okay, these are my non-negotiables every day, just like getting up, you know, taking a shower, eating breakfast, whatever. My non-negotiables are I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to strength train. I'm going to make sure I get X number of macronutrients, whatever. That has to come first. Or I'm going to make sure I meditate. It might not even be some of those other things. It could be something that, restores their energy and soul. I think they have to look in the mirror, prioritize it because no one will do it for you.
Yeah, that's so good. And the reality is we're talking about healthcare leaders. This is true for any leader though, especially leaders that really care about others. We're taught. I'm a believer in servant leadership, right? But we're taught that servant leadership often means putting others before ourselves. And I'm a believer that I need to set my agenda aside to lead other people, but
Mhm.
I need to put my self-care before other people. It's like the instruction we get on the airplane, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first. If we don't do that, we can't help others. And so
Mhm.
making our own self-care, wellness, healthcare a priority so that we can care for others, right? We're nurses, we're pharmacists, we're physicians. Our passion is caring for other people, but we've got to care for ourselves so that we can do that well, right? As I mentioned at the top of this topic, we can't pour from an empty cup. There's other things I think too, and I don't want to pull us too off track. I just interviewed recently Dr. Jamie Goff, and she's written a book called The Secure Leader, and it's all about doing the hard work of analyzing ourself, right? Really becoming self-aware and what creates bad habits, bad behaviors, the inability to care for self, maybe the for me, I've done this work. I'll let you listen to that, Greta. We won't. It's going to publish in October. It's a fantastic conversation. I highly recommend everybody listening today go get The Secure Leader, the book by Jamie Goff, because it really is about, kind of our, what she calls the attachment theories and what kind of conditioning creates some of our triggers or some of our things of why we do things or why we don't do certain things, like why we avoid a difficult conversation with an employer, why we don't ask for help from our boss when we're drowning, those kind of things. So I agree with you. It begins with the person in the mirror, right? I mean, we have to do that work because no one else is going to do it for us. I always recommend when we're on this topic, everybody should read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, right? And about him overcoming, the atrocities of the concentration camps and how he survived that.
Mhm.
It can feel like we're in that kind of situation today, right? And there's a lot of s- caring for self that we need to do into that. You want to add more before we move on?
Well, I think, I don't know. I look back to when I was a nurse leader managing departments in a hospital, even when I was in a director level working in a hospital. And I think about why did I put off caring for myself the way I did, or why did I sort of deprioritize it? And one of the things that I think is human about all of us is that I think aging has helped me think about it as more important. When you're in your 20s and 30s, you think, oh, I can get to that later, and the older you get, for me personally, I'm starting to think a lot more about what is my not only my legacy, but my longevity plan.
Yeah.
And I've had to reprioritize for that reason. And I have a special needs son who I think will need me for far longer than other kids. So I'm like, I want to live as long as possible and I want to be my best as long as possible. And so it's that what is my why
Mhm.
shift I had to make. And Viktor Frankl actually talks a lot about that. What is his why? Um, and so I think that's the key for leaders. Your why isn't to lose weight or because somebody told you to, or because there's a walking club that you want to seem collegial and join. It's because you cannot physically and mentally be at your best for others if you haven't done it for yourself first.
Yeah.
So it really comes back to that. And I now more than ever wholeheartedly believe that and see that as a big gap for leaders.
Yeah, it's so important. I often talk to leaders about this. My wife and I, we're in our 50s now, empty nesters. We talk about this frequently. You know, what do I want to be able to do 20 years from now with my grandkids, right? And this is why I exercise and take care of myself physically. Um, what do I want to be able to do 20 years from now in my business? I've read hundreds, if not thousands of books, Greta, but in my wife's, why do you need another book? Well, because I want to stay sharp. You know, I want to be able to, that leader that needs a new piece of advice and doesn't have time to read. That's why I continue to sharpen my own, toolkit of reading books and just, trying to get what some might consider useless knowledge, but it's knowledge that I may be able to use later, right? And I want to be able to, run and play with my grandkids at some point. I was lucky enough to hike to the bottom of the Grand Canyon a couple of years ago in 23. I know you recently visited there.
Yeah.
Um, but on that hike down to the bottom, there was a couple that were in their 70s that were coming back up as I'm going down, Greta. And I'm like, I want to be able to do that at 70 years old. I want to be able to hike to the Grand Canyon. Now, when I got out of the Grand Canyon, I'm like, I'm not so sure I want to do that again because it's a tough hike back out. But again, these are to your point, we have to have a bigger vision for ourselves than just going to work every day. And no one can do that for us, right? No one can do that for us.
Right. It all comes back to us, and I keep thinking, wow, it took me a couple decades of my life to learn this, and so I'm glad I've now figured out that, like, it's up to me to master it, and I feel so much better when I'm really putting that first, because no matter what role you have, that there will be challenges, and I think people think, "Oh, if I weren't a nurse manager or if I was in a different leadership role, I'd have more time, I'd have more flexibility, I'd have more this and that." Yeah, you might, and other things would get in your way then too. So it
That's right.
it comes down to what's here and what you're doing for yourself. And you brought up earlier, Mike, the idea of and that practice of self-reflection, sort of building that GPS plan for yourself. And I like to think about it like I was just involved in contributing to a book for the company Laudio, and one of the chapters is all about reflecting, and it really focuses on asking yourself, what did I do today or yesterday? If you're doing it the next day, what did I do that felt effective? And how do I know it was effective in
Mm,
terms of reaching my priorities or getting the most important things done? And what's one thing I need to modify for tomorrow to make sure that I can be a little better than I was today? And those questions are so powerful. And a lot of leaders will say that they, do reflection, and it can sound a little bit ambiguous or a little touchy-feely, but to spend 5 or 8 minutes in dedicated reflection each day doing that can go really far in terms of building better practices for yourself, both in terms of your wellness, but in terms of everything else too.
love that. I call that practicing sapere videre, Greta. I write about it in my book, Quit Losing Talent. Sapere videre is just a Latin term that means learning how to see. And I apply that to three lenses of leadership: hindsight, like looking back, looking at yesterday. What did I do that worked great? What did I do that, didn't work great? Foresight, what I want today to be like, what I want this week to be like, what I want 20 years to be like, right? And then the third lens is insight, using hindsight, foresight. What am I going to do different today? What am I going to do different this week? What am I going to do different in that hard conversation the next time, right? So just practicing sapere videre is just a learning how to see, doing a little reflection instead of doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for different results, right? Which we all know
Right.
what that's the definition of.
Right.
So so I love what you're teaching. I love what you're sharing here. Let's hit one more topic here. Um, gosh, there's so much that we talk about, but briefly, let's talk about the credentials not providing the skills for
Mhm.
change outcomes, because so many organizations, right? They will only promote leaders who have the bachelor's or the master's or certain credentials. That doesn't always make the best leaders, though, right? So I'm gonna let you just speak into what you mean by that, as you shared that.
Well, I can speak primarily to nursing in this regard because nursing has come a really long way in terms of being just a career path vocation to an actual scientific profession.
Mm.
And, decades and decades ago, nurses went to a diploma school for 12, 18 months. They worked side by side with other nurses. They got a diploma. They were nurses. And then over time, as different credentialing pathways emerged, nurses need a bachelor's degree. Now it's often recommended that nurses and especially leaders have a master's degree or are holders of a specialty certificate.
Mm.
And I personally I got a bachelor's degree, traditional 4-year college, and came out of there, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Went for my master's when I was a nurse manager. And what I vividly remember is this feeling like, this is great. I'm learning some things. And I definitely got some more knowledge around budgeting, finance, some leadership concepts. But I was still scared to death to go out and have a performance conversation with my one negative team member.
Mhm.
And I was still really worried about how to handle the fact that one person was bullying another. Or I still didn't know what to do when I found an employee that had a misstep several times over. None of that was really taught in my degree. And so the more I started working with other leaders, I started realizing, and I mean, this isn't novel, right? Other people realize this too, but I started being like, whoa, like hearing about this highly credentialed leader. Sometimes I'll have a leader with a doctorate approach me and be like, oh my gosh, I just finished my DNP, got my doctorate. We're like, and she's like, I have this really negative employee. What should I say to them? And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And so I think we failed people in this way. We've done a great service for nursing as a profession by elevating the need for learning and academic credentials. And we've got to do way better at teaching skills because, as you said, many leaders are thrown in, no skills, and we hope for the best because they were a good clinician or a good staff person.
Yeah, one of the things, look, I suspect you're a lot like me, as I never waited on the organization to develop me. I've always been a self-developer, right? I mean, as I said earlier, I've read hundreds of books. I've spent thousands, tens of thousands of dollars on myself with coaching and training programs. Not formal. I have a bachelor's degree, that's it, but I have more education around leadership and teamwork and communication that I don't have a certificate for, but I've had training with. I've worked with John Maxwell side by side, learning from him and his leadership philosophy. Quint Studer, learning from him, right, and all of the things that he teaches. Um, and I just want to challenge leaders here. I do believe organizations should invest in their people, but I also believe that we can't wait to learn those skills. What many organizations call soft skills, I call essential skills. The essential skill of having a hard conversation, right? The essential skill of creating values that drive your organization and your team forward. The essential skill of creating teamwork versus individual work within the organization. Those things are essential, and we have to learn those on our own too. So I want to ask you to speak into that a little bit. The responsibility of the organization to develop those versus the responsibility of the individual to say, yeah, I own that and I'm going to go get that too.
Oh, well, you're speaking to my heart here, Mike, because I have that same philosophy. Like it's not up to anybody but me.
Hmm.
Right back to the wellness. It's not up to anybody but me. And so, for instance, right now I'm getting my doctorate. No one told me I had to. I'm not part of any organization that said I have to. I'm just doing it because I realize I want that level of knowledge. I want to be able to do research. I need that for myself and to help other people more. So if a leader doesn't really feel like they would do it on their own anyway, they probably shouldn't do it. I'm just going to be honest because going to get a piece of paper isn't really going to make you a better leader unless you truly believe it's what you need and want. And so even if your organization does support it or pay for it, you've really got to want it in your heart.
Yeah.
Um, and I think one of the keys is organizations have invested a lot of money in ensuring that nurse leaders especially get certified, take certification courses, go get their bachelor's or their master's or even their doctorate. And Those are not skill-based competency development activities usually. Usually they are growth of knowledge and, you know, people come out of it with a heightened awareness of certain things. But when you say, how do you apply the tactics of being an authentic leader? Most leaders would not be able to respond to you with a list of things they're going to do today.
Mm,
Or if you say, how do you proactively manage performance in a measurable, structured way? You could have someone that just graduated with a master's degree who may be unsure how to go about that, which is very common.
yeah.
So organizations should be looking at how do they ensure that their programming builds actual measurable skills that serve as a shared mental model across an organization.
Yeah, that's really good. Great way to kind of segue into my next question. Let's talk about the responsibility of the organization to invest in their people and the dangers or the cost of not doing so. What are all the costs in not doing that versus the investment of doing that?
Oh boy. Well, Mike, do you know what it cost in 2024 to lose a nurse?
At least double the annual salary of that individual, right?
Well, it depends, I guess, where they were. To lose a nurse can cost anywhere in 2024. NSI put out data. NSI is a staffing company that publishes reliable data on this topic every year. And in 2024, the average cost of an RN turning over was $61,000. So that is less than their salary. But
Mm.
if you think about on a med surge unit where the turnover rate is roughly anywhere from 15 to 19%. So 15 to 19%, let's say that's 5 full-time RNs at $60,000 each, right? So now you have $300,000 that you have lost just because of nurses leaving. And by the way, when they're leaving, we know that the culprit of their attrition is not higher pay elsewhere, is not a better shift. Yes, those things may be partial factors, but it is toxic culture, lack of leadership presence, and lack of support. We know that to be true. An abundance of data to show it.
Yep.
So if an organization is losing a couple $100,000 in one department by losing their nurses, it's pretty clear to see that the ROI of fixing it, there's a great return on investment because you can fix it for far less than that with the right type of support. So there's an obligation here that I think is underexplored when it comes to how organizations can actually do better. And it's not just more shift differential, all the different things you hear about that are shiny, but are actually improving retention.
Yeah, and you just hit on a key point. Many organizations at the executive level, they look at the symptoms, right? Not really the causes, and they try to put band-aids on the symptoms. Let's pay more. Let's fix this shift differential. Let's rework our call schedule, whatever those things are. And those are simply symptoms of a bigger issue, as you said. Leaders that want to do a good job. Look, I'm a believer that all leaders want to be a better leader. They just don't know how. They haven't, as you said, maybe they have the education formally, but they don't have the skill set or the development of their leadership capacity to really know how to keep people, right? In my book, I teach a simple I call it a talent lock conversation. Most talent lock conversations come at the day of resignation. What can I do to keep you? Let's pay you more, right? That's not really a talent lock conversation. I'm coaching leaders, and I'm sure you are too, to have regular conversation with your team members and find out where their frustrations are, what would cause them to leave, what are some things we can do different in the department. And look, most of the time it's around accountability, right? They just want others to be more accountable. But see, leaders look at that as a people problem versus a leadership challenge, right? It's really a leader not stepping into those accountability challenges or learning the skill to do that. And I believe it's a responsibility of the executive team to offer those development opportunities, right? And a development opportunity is not, hey, Greta, you're a nurse manager now. That's not a development opportunity. That's simply more responsibility. A
Yeah.
development opportunity is really, okay, let's learn how to do this. Let's teach Greta how to do this. We'll let you kind of close out here as you speak into that, and then we'll wrap up our conversation.
Well, I love what you're saying there, and what I envision whenever someone talks about something like this is sort of this necessary cascade, right? Because if you can teach a closest to care leader to have, as you might say, talent lock conversations, then you have to teach their leader to have a conversation with that leader about how did your talent lock conversations go this week? What are
Okay.
3 things you heard that are keeping people? What are 2 things you think that you need to work on so that you don't have more turnover? And many senior leaders also feel uncomfortable with those types of conversations.
Yeah.
And what I love to do in my work is help sort of decrease the noise around that and increase the comfort level, because once people learn how to do it, it's like, oh, I have goosebumps. It's like a light bulb moment. They're like, this isn't as hard as I thought. I don't have to be aggressive. I don't have to be punitive. I can just have an appreciative inquiry and open dialogue that allows us to exchange ideas, but still continues to set and raise the bar.
Mm.
So I think that cascade is key to all of this, no matter what we're talking about: wellness, accountability, talent retention. It's all around, does the first line or closest to care leader know what to do? And does their leader know how to lead them through it?
That's so good. It's a great way to kind of just share what I believe the true measure of leadership is. And the true measure of leadership is a leader who can develop another leader who can develop another leader, right? It's true succession. It's true. It's the truth. So the CEO needs to be able to develop a leader underneath him or her that can develop another leader underneath him or her. And that cascades, as you said, cascades down. The unfortunate thing is, even at the CEO level, they've risen maybe to that level because they can get results, but they're not necessarily great mentors or developers of other leaders. And so we've got to, even at the senior levels, we've got to develop that skill set because it's what's required for the future. I mean, we're in a real epidemic right now with staffing challenges and the shortage of nurses and physicians and all of those things that are rapidly chasing us down. And if we don't get busy about developing every person as a leader in an organization, we're gonna face major, even more challenges than we face today. Greta,
Exactly.
I'm sure you and I could talk for another hour or two and not run out of things to talk about. Thank you for saying yes to the Lead Up podcast. Tell our listeners where they can learn more about you and connect with you if they wanna do so.
Thanks. The best place to connect with me would be on LinkedIn. You can find me there, or you can go out to our website, radiusleaders.com, where we have some free resources, and you can always request some information there about me as well. But the best place, the most efficient place is definitely LinkedIn.
Great. So we'll make sure, listeners, we add Greta's LinkedIn link in the show notes, as well as Radius, Radius leaders.com in the show notes. If you want to learn more about or from Greta, we welcome you to check out her website, connect with her on LinkedIn as well. Greta, thanks for a great conversation, and thanks for what you do in the world of healthcare leadership. It's truly appreciated.
Thanks, Mike.